Hey there, you glup shittos. It's time for us to feast. Hey there, interwebs. I hope you are all doing well, and I am so freaking excited to finally be back talking about Star Wars Andor yet again, because we are here to review Season 2, Episode 1, the premiere episode aptly titled 1 Year Later. If y'all are new here, y'all should just know Star Wars Andor Season 1 was one of my favorite TV shows, not just of its year, but possibly of all time. It was just such a fantastic anti-fascist piece of media. It was just taking Star Wars incredibly seriously in a way that I don't necessarily want to see all Star Wars become. I love its sort of pulpy, fun, sort of sci-fi mishmash of it, but like this show sort of really getting into the anti-fascist roots, the historical roots of a lot of revolutionary movements. Tony Gilroy's such clear understanding of how revolutions happen, how anti-fascist movements need to build, and also the complexities and intricacies of all of that, and the conflicts that come out of all of that, and the class dynamics that come out of all of that. It was just such a smart, layered show in a sci-fi setting that I just really love, and I adored it so much because it made me want to go out and punch a Nazi after every single episode. Not that I don't normally want to go out and punch Nazis, but it got me really, really pumped and excited to do so, even while reckoning with the cost. It was just such a really beautiful, poetic, powerful show. And Season 2 is unfortunately coming at a time, I feel, where that message is needed even more so. So I've been really looking forward to this season, and it's going to be interesting too, because this is a season that is coming out at this political climate, but also being made under Disney, which has certainly been a capitalist machine that has often tried to sand off a lot of revolutionary edges of a lot of series. And so with the more attention probably being paid to Star Wars Andor than Season 1 ever got, I'm curious to see if the show is going to really hold on to that. My hope will be yes, but certainly we shall see. But this episode, and I'm going to say this up front without spoiling too much if you haven't seen it yet, certainly gives me a lot of hope in true Star Warsian fashion that it has not lost that edge, because certainly all of that history, all of that sort of pulling from specific revolutionary movements, from fascist movements, and all of this stuff is very much up front in this show, with also some of my fun little Star Wars nonsense that I really love, that I didn't actually expect from this episode. Before we get into the meat and potatoes of this, I'm just going to say this right up front in terms of how I'm going to cover this season. For those of you who don't know, they are going to be releasing this season in 3 episode chunks over the next 4 weeks, so there's already 3 episodes out right now. However, I am only going to be in this video reviewing the premiere episode. The reason being is I wanted to get something out really quick just because I was excited. I wanted to talk about it. I wanted to have it out the first night. However, I didn't necessarily want to just binge all 3 episodes all at once because I want to savor this show a little bit. I might end up watching all 3 episodes tonight, but I didn't want to give this pressure to myself to be like, all right, I gotta go just get out because I gotta get this review out, which sometimes I feel with other shows. Like, I love doing the reviews. I love talking about it with all of you, but sometimes I have to be like, all right, I gotta watch it tonight to get through. And this is just a show I want to savor. So if it was just 1 episode, wouldn't bother me, but 3, I do want to at least give myself permission to do that. So for the next few weeks, I am going to be releasing my reviews of Star Wars Andor, not the night it releases like I typically do with most shows, but probably a day or 2 afterwards. Maybe I'll get excited and do it. I'm not going to commit to any regular release schedule. I will try to get to it within a few days, but I want to make sure I give myself permission to enjoy this show instead of getting out content for y'all, because I want to talk about this. I'm excited to talk about this, and certainly I'm sure there's a video essay on this season in my future if I get really excited about it like I did for Season 1, which, by the way, if you haven't seen my video essay on Season 1 of Star Wars Andor, it's over on my main channel, so check that out. But yeah, I just basically want to give myself a chance to savor the show. So I'm probably going to end up finishing this review and going back and watching the rest and then getting the other review of this out in the next day or so. But just know that there will be a review for the next 2 episodes coming out in the near future, and then from there will be 1 review video per every 3 episode block that won't be coming out for a day or 2 until after the episodes come out. So that's just how this is going to roll, but we are going to focus just on the first episode here with, again, the aptly titled episode 1 Year Later. And as I sort of didn't mention there, I know each 3 episode chunk is going to be 1 year of time leading all the way up to Rogue One and the events of A New Hope, sort of building into that movie. So I'm aware that every episode is going to be a 1 year chunk. So this is 1 year later from the end of Star Wars Andor Season 1, the first of 4 years that we're going to get in this season. This was a really strong setup, and I liked that this season really just started off with a bang and got us into a really great action sequence. It could have done, not that Star Wars Andor Season 1 didn't have a little bit of an action start. It did, with some of the stuff from Cassian's past, as well as him fighting the Rent-A-Cops back on Ferrix. But this was like a much more action-packed one, and just getting us right into the action really quickly. But I like that we start off the episode in a kind of quieter moment with Andor talking to this presumably engineer, Empire engineer who has defected to the rebellion. And I love that we get a really good insight into her perspective. So like, she's, living her life. She had fun here, as she said, but she also is understanding the Empire's doing terrible things and making these ships, this test ship that, Cassian's ending up stealing here. She understands she's doing horrible things. And it reminds me a lot of Luke Skywalker, in A New Hope, where he says he wants to join the Imperial Academy. Like, in this society, sometimes the only options you have are to join the military. It's sometimes the best option you have. Even if you understand it's part of the Imperial machinery, it's like what you end up joining because it's how you grew up. It's the options that you have. And so it's just an interesting sort of look into, this is my life. I was working here. This is what I did, even though I understand I was part of an apparatus that was wrong. And I love Cassian sort of redirecting her to being like, inspiring her to be like, you are coming home to yourself. It's a really beautiful line. There's a poetry to it of like, the Empire's wrong and you're making the right choice, and it is worth it for me to be here to see you step into the circle, to step into this sort of consciousness, this sort of revolutionary consciousness that you are now joining, and that's what makes it worth it. Every single moment of fighting the Empire makes it worth it when we have these moments, even if we don't end up like living to see the ultimate goal. And again, that's just sort of like that very consciousness-raising revolutionary spirit that a lot of revolutionaries have to have when building that. And I can tell that Cassian is earnest in that, but it is also him trying to inspire her to steal her. And I love the way that they had had them act off of each other, with her constantly looking away from him, her being kind of like not. Number one, being afraid to look at him because she knows she's part of the rebellion. She was told not to look at him, to remember his face or whatever. Again, that sort of calls back to a lot of like what revolutionary movements do. They try to segment themselves off, so if someone gets captured or tortured, they won't have too much information. But he is sort of like getting her that moment of inspiration, and she eventually looks at him. So it's played very, very well. The action sequence, though, with Cassian stealing the, I know it's a certain type of TIE fighter, I forget the exact time, but like an experimental TIE fighter, essentially, was just actually surprisingly comedic. Like, I did not expect the comedy that we were going to get with this, like with Cassian pulling back and having to like blow stuff up to get through. Like, it was all very funny, but shot so well. Like, it's just, I love that. I love that this show makes like just a TIE fighter, like a single TIE fighter, feel big and weighty. The big problem with a lot of other Star Wars projects, and this is the thing that I loved about Andor, is it just sometimes makes like, oh, we have a billion TIE fighters on screen, and even an Imperial Star Destroyer doesn't feel like that big of a deal. It's just sort of like part of the background, whereas here it's like just a TIE fighter feels big. Just one stormtrooper with a rocket launcher feels big and dangerous and like got some weight and heft to it. So just that whole sequence was just a lot of fun, him escaping and him falling off. And I love like getting to see the different style of flying. Like Cassian's flying is like all over the place. And then we get the other TIE fighters following after him. But this eventually leads to Cassian getting away and trying to meet with Porco, which, by the way, the name Porco, very Star Wars, straight up Star Wars Porco name. I'm here for it. Everyone just takes that very seriously. But then he runs into what he eventually learns is another sort of revolutionary cell that has been working in conjunction with the larger rebellion. And this is, again, something that we see throughout revolutionary histories, right? Where different revolutionary groups will have to work together. Different sects, maybe like a larger rebellion movement will fund a like more either indigenous movement or a more local movement. And the communication between these groups won't always be really good. And so they might actually run at counter purposes to each other, like we see here, where they get involved and messed up in what Cassian's doing. And even though technically on the same side, they don't really believe each other because they don't trust that Cassian is not an Imperial test pilot because he's dressed like one. Makes sense. sense to a degree. Why wouldn't they believe that? Because there's been no connection there. And I just love this show understanding like, oh yeah, the rebellion isn't one just connected thing that has perfect communication. They are going to be disparate cells, different groups that all sort of like link up together, but they are going to work across purposes. And you can see the desperation of this specific local group that is here. Like they haven't eaten in several days, and you can see like Cassian trying to build their, like he realizes his mission is more important, or he thinks his mission is more important than theirs, and so he's like trying to stoke infighting so he can get away. And you can see that like these people don't have a lot of resources. They don't even like have a clear hierarchy structure that they're working under, and so it causes infighting and eventually leads to the fallout at the end of this. So I just really liked seeing the realities of that situation, where even like last season when we had the bank vault, the heist, the Aldani heist, which wasn't a bank vault heist, it was stealing like a shipment. But the Aldani heist, there was that cell that Cassian was in, like there was some tensions there, but at least there was some level of like clear delineation of who does what, and there was a plan, and it wasn't necessarily, and it was like they were doing one specific thing, where this is just sort of more a disorganized cell, especially after they sort of have clearly dealt with some sort of violent moment that just killed some of their leaders, as we hear. So yeah, just a very clear discussion of like the disorganization that you can see in some of the revolutionary cells. So really cool there. What this does bring us to, though, is well, let me talk about Mon Mothma stuff first. It was interesting to just see all the stuff going on with Mon Mothma. Clearly, we're seeing the fallout of last season, where she basically signed her daughter up to be in an arranged marriage, as is per her cultural custom, and how much she regrets that. I really love at the end of the episode, we see all these wheeling and dealings that she's sort of touching upon in her estate as the wedding's getting ready, but we end on the small moment with her daughter, who is clearly saying, the boy I'm going to marry, he doesn't even want to hold my hand. And you can really see Mon Mothma like feel that. It's not just her being like, oh yeah, get up, girl, and go deal with it. She knows that she's kind of assigning her daughter to a loveless marriage because she needed to do that for the rebellion, to be able to, be able to fund the rebellion and launder the money that she had. So I liked seeing the emotional fallout for that on Mon Mothma, that it didn't all just work out great, that she knows she's consigning her daughter to a larger kind of hell that even she's kind of lived within to a degree with Perrin. Who was interesting to see Perrin here and kind of doing okay, considering how she threw him under the bus for his gambling debts at the end of last season. I'm curious to see how because it's all very much, they're putting up a front in front of everybody. I'm curious to see if we get a private moment between Mon Mothma and Perrin and how their relationship currently is, because obviously it was it was one of like those, like, not necessarily, I don't even want to, like, clearly they had an arranged marriage, but it was such an interesting dynamic because Perrin he just was so bored and just a disaffected, affluent, a guy from the upper class. And it wasn't necessarily loveless, but it wasn't full of love. But they sort of had come to an understanding with each other in their arranged marriage. But obviously that balance shifts and turns over the years. And we sort of saw one of her throwing him under the bus at the end of last season. So I'm curious to see where they're at now. And I loved seeing the setup for all the rest of the stuff, like Luthen being there for some other reason that we don't know yet, but her kind of having tension with him, being like, why are you at my wedding? You shouldn't be here. You're part of the rebellion. I don't like you being here. Makes me uncomfy. So curious to see where that's ultimately going. But I also love Luthen and his assistant sort of being like, what's going on with Cassian? Can we get the information? And Luthen them being very anxious and her being like, we can't get information here. And again, it goes to speaking to how revolutionary movements like didn't have perfect communication. They couldn't get information to each other. That could be like one of the big problems. So very interesting to see all the wheeling and dealing and political machinations going on there. Obviously, she talks to the guy who set up her foundation that Mon Mothma does in there as well. And so there's clearly something going on with the money. I'm curious to see if, like, my assumption is going to be like he got involved in some surreptitious dealings, and so now that's going to disrupt the foundation, which means the money that's being funneled to the rebellion through Mon Mothma is going to be disrupted by criminal activities. So she has to figure something out with that. So, like, interesting to see. Maybe there'll be something else going on, but that feels like where that's ultimately going. So curious ultimately see how that's going to play out in the grand scheme of things. Also interesting to see Mon Mothma's sister, I forget her name, but the one who headed the Aldani heist, sort of be there and being just very angry and just being off-putting and being like, oh man, it's just interesting because she's a girl who is a revolutionary. She has fought for the rebellion, but she is from this aristocratic class, so she's sort of playing a little bit in this sort of like, oh, I'm a violent militia person mode, like this, like, not to say she hasn't put herself in danger or anything like that. She clearly has, but there's still a little bit of like, she's from the upper class in this role. So sort of curious to see like her in her quote unquote native element, even though she has clear discomfort being in that native element. So yeah, just interesting there with her. But this also brings us to my boy Ben Mendelsohn back as Krennic from Rogue One. I love this little middle manager piece of shit boy that he plays. Krennic is such a good like middle manager guy. It's just so fascinating because you like see he's like, yeah, I have aspirations to get ahead. And I like he plays himself up so important. It's like this room is need to know, and like Tarkin and Wolfie Lauren won't even like will be brought in when it's time. You know, he's just it's again the mission that they're doing is important considering with the Empire Palpatine's involvement. But you can also see him. There's a little bit of that like relishing like I'm important, which I kind of I enjoy. But this conference is so fascinating because I won't spoil where this is going in terms of Star Wars history. If you know, you know. There's the stuff with the Gormans is leading somewhere, and clearly, it's interesting what we see of the Gormans. And I also like that video that we get to see with like the spiders and everything. It was clearly in that like 1920s, like, hey, this is the touristy sort of video that we get. So it feels like very tourist newsreel-esque, you know, even the Star Wars environment, which is, you know, playing a little fast and loose with the technology, but it feels like very in the style of what they're trying to evoke of sort of like the rising fascist era of the 1930s, 20s sort of era. And from what I have read, this conference that we're seeing here is meant to not one-for-one parallel. There's obviously differences, but meant to parallel the Wannsee Conference, which was, this is kind of trigger warning here to a degree, which was a conference by the Nazis in how to carry out the final solution against the Jewish people. Now, obviously, this is not one for one with that because they were certainly much more along in the propaganda at the Wannsee Conference era, just to talk about how dark it was. But we see little parallels here, right? With the Gormans, the propaganda against them. We see these people clearly setting up the Gormans as a group of people to be viewed as like these aristocratic, arrogant people that then they're going to seed more propaganda against to try to stereotype them and to scapegoat them so that the Empire can extract what they want from their community. And this is what happened to the Jewish people, right? Like there were already pre-existing biases and anti-Semitism against the Jews for history, throughout history that the Nazis were sort of pulling upon. But they certainly created very anti-Semitic cartoons that depicted the Nazis as spiders, as controlling, as, you know, they had all the money. And so this was used to justify, you know, taxing the Jewish people, taking a lot of the money, removing them from businesses, just sort of using this propaganda to be able to make that. And it wasn't just the Nazis, it was literally the newspapers were involved in this, like so many different groups that worked in conjunction with the Nazis to make scapegoats and dehumanize the Jewish people. And we start to see the intentionality of that project on display here with the Empire towards the Gormans and being like, we want to extract resources from them. So we're going to come up with a plan. We're going to build an armory there. We're going to get more money from them. We're going to use the spider imagery against them, which is very seemingly calling out to very clear images of Jewish people being framed as like spiders controlling the world that we saw in Nazi propaganda. So like very clearly the intentional project of building a scapegoat against the Gormans to figure out how to steal their resources. And talking about like the political power that they have and knowing how to sort of maneuver within that. Very, very dark, very, very fucked up. And it's even more fucked up when you get to see like the scenes where like they're eating little foods. Like it's a meeting to like talk about ultimately will lead to the event that is important in Star Wars history. I won't say what it is. Again, I don't want to spoil for people who don't know. But clearly leading to darker stuff, regardless. And they're just sitting here eating little, like, you know, having a little luncheon, little brunch. They have little hors d'oeuvres that they're eating as they're discussing this horrific stuff. And that feels sadly very fucked up, but real. And it was interesting to see Deirdre sort of being like, she's in this meeting, and I love Krennic going up to her. It's like, oh, yeah, you fucked up on Ferrix, but I called you here because you've certainly proved yourself, and you already had a plan, so tell me. And her plan, it seems, is to set up a group of rebels on the planet that are going to make the rebellion look bad, or at least kind of create justification for the Empire to come in. It's like, well, you have rebels, and they're doing bad things, so don't you want the Empire to come in to try to help you out with these insurgents, because they're fucking with not only are they fighting against us, but they're causing problems for you, like stealing like that sort of stuff. And you can see this throughout history of, like, there's numerous different things that you could point to. I think of, like, Imperial groups funding more, sort of like settler colonial groups funding more right-wing movements against left-wing movement. Like, there would be more left-wing rebellion movements, and you would see sort of settler colonial societies fund right-wing movements to sort of push out the left-wing rebellion movements so they can justify creating even more violence against the disenfranchised group. So yeah, there's like numerous examples of history of that, and we're getting that clearly seems to be Deirdre's plan here. So yeah, just utterly fascinating, if not completely fucked up. The other element that we get this episode too is we get to see Bix is away on another planet. Clearly, they've sort of, the people of Ferrix, as they escaped, have set up on another planet, and Bix is in hiding, and she's worried about, like, the Imperials checking visas as a trans person right now. Going through passport nonsense in the United States, very much feel some of that element, but it's not the exact same thing. Obviously, they will catch her for not having a visa and not being allowed to be there, but certainly I see a connection in that sort of stuff. So she's in hiding, clearly got some trauma from her torture on Ferrix, which is, I'm glad that that's still being carried over, and curious to see where that storyline is ultimately going. That's the one at the moment that feels a little bit the most... not ancillary, but hasn't been pushed forward a ton just yet. So curious to see where that's ultimately going with, Cassian's found Ferrix family over there that we see building. I liked also seeing B2 Emo, my little boy B2 Emo, as well as the picture of Marva on the wall. So I was like, oh, love them. Especially B2 Emo. He's one of my favorite droids. My cute little droid. I love how much they treat him like a person. It makes me happy. Like actually treating a droid as a person and not just slave labor and sentient beings. So appreciate that for Andor for doing that so much with B2 Emo. So love that. Love seeing him. But that's ultimately where we leave off on this episode. Clearly 2 more to go. I'm sure many of you have already probably watched the next 2 episodes, but I just want to at least get this review out ASAP. And I'm going to go probably watch episode 2 right now. Like I said, I will have the next 2 episodes reviewed and out with some time this week. Be on the lookout for that. And then for the coming weeks, it'll probably take me a few days to get around to watching and reviewing every episode because I want to relish them. But yes, Andor's here. Great setup so far. Excited to see where we're going to go in these next 2 episodes. Feels like I'm getting to watch a movie in three distinct chunks every week. So excited for that. All right, everybody. I hope to see y'all later. I'll talk to you very soon about the next 2 episodes. Until then, I hope y'all live long and prosper.